I once lay on the floor, blood soaking into white carpet, convinced my life was over. One man, one betrayal, one premature child who wasn't supposed to survive. But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. My name is Evelyn Hart, a woman who lost everything, then rebuilt it from ashes, a home, a community, and a dream that had never existed before. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe. If you've ever overcome something hard, trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened next. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of our Bellevue mansion, each drop a tiny fist pounding out a rhythm I'd grown to hate. Seattle winters had always been gray, but this December felt darker than the others. Maybe because I held the pregnancy test in my trembling hand, two pink lines staring back at me like a miracle I'd stopped believing in. After last year's miscarriage, the doctors had used words like unlikely and challenging. Logan had stopped touching me altogether, as if my body's failure to carry a child had made me untouchable. But here it was, proof that sometimes the impossible happens anyway. I found him in his home office, 3 monitors glowing with stock charts and environmental impact reports. EcoCore's latest quarterly had beaten expectations again. The financial press loved calling him the green tech prophet. If only they knew how little green there was in his heart. Logan? My voice came out smaller than intended. I need to tell you something. He didn't look up from his screens. Can it wait? I'm reviewing the Singapore expansion metrics. I'm pregnant. The clicking of his keyboard stopped. Silence stretched between us, thick as the December fog outside. When he finally turned, his gray eyes held the same calculating look he gave failing startups before crushing them. How far along? 8 weeks. I just found out. I wanted to be sure before... Get rid of it. The words hit me like ice water. I must have misheard. What? You heard me. He turned back to his monitors. Schedule it for next week. I'll have Melissa clear my calendar to drive you. Melissa, his 26-year-old advisor with the Harvard MBA and legs that went on forever, the one who stayed late for strategy sessions. This is our baby, Logan. After everything we've been through. He laughed, a sound sharp enough to draw blood. You mean your obsession with breeding? Your inability to accept that some women simply aren't meant to be mothers? I pressed my hand against my still flat stomach, a protective gesture that felt both new and ancient. I won't do it. That's when he stood, all 6'3" of him unfolding like a threat. Then we're done. You don't mean that. But he was already pulling papers from his desk drawer. Papers that looked suspiciously prepared, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. Divorce agreement. Sign it, take the downtown condo and a modest settlement. Fight me and I'll bury you in legal fees until you're living in your car. My hands shook as I scanned the pages. Non-disclosure agreements, custody waivers for any future children, a gag order on speaking to media. You had these ready. I've had them ready for months. He moved past me toward the door, pausing only to deliver the killing blow. You used to be someone with potential, Evelyn. An architect, a thinker. Now you're just another woman desperate for a baby she'll probably lose anyway. Something inside me snapped. Not broke, but snapped forward like a rubber band pulled too tight. I grabbed our wedding champagne flutes from the bookshelf, the Waterford crystal we'd toasted with 5 years ago when we promised for better or worse. The first one shattered against the wall beside his head, rainbow fragments catching the light. The second I crushed in my hand, feeling the sharp edges bite into my palm. Get out of my house, he said, voice deadly calm. You have 1 hour. Blood dripped from my hand onto the white carpet. The carpet I'd chosen, in the house I'd helped design, with the man I'd thought I knew. I wrapped my scarf around the wounds and walked to our bedroom, each step feeling like crossing into foreign territory. 1 suitcase, That's all I could manage with my bleeding hand and shaking legs. Clothes thrown in without thought. My mother's jewelry box. The ultrasound photo I'd had taken in secret, just to be sure. No time for the books I'd collected, the architectural awards on my office wall, the life I'd built over 32 years. As I dragged the suitcase down the marble staircase I'd once been so proud of, I heard her laugh. Melissa stood in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in my bathrobe, the silk one Logan had given me last Christmas. Her smile held all the victory of a conqueror surveying new territory. "The car service is here," she said, voice sweet as antifreeze. "Logan thought you might need help getting to your new situation." I left without a word, rolling my suitcase through the December rain to the black town car idling in our circular drive. The driver wouldn't meet my eyes as he loaded my bag. He'd probably done this before, ferried Logan's discarded problems away into the night. As we pulled away, I looked back once at the house glowing warm against the darkness. Through the great room window, I could see them together, her hand on his chest, his arms around her waist. The family portrait we'd had taken last year still hung above the fireplace, two people playing at happiness, neither knowing the picture was already a lie. My phone buzzed. Logan. "Condo keys will be messengered tomorrow. Your accounts will be transferred by Monday. Don't make this harder than necessary." I turned off the phone and pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching Seattle blur past through rain and tears. 8 weeks. That's how long this new life had been growing inside me, silent and secret and impossible. 8 weeks, and everything I'd known was already gone. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. "Where to, ma'am?" I gave him the address of a motel in Tacoma I'd passed once during a site visit for a school project. Somewhere Logan would never think to look. Somewhere I could bleed in private. From my hand, from my heart, from the life being carved out of me one brutal word at a time. As Seattle's skyline disappeared behind us, I pressed my wounded hand against my stomach and made my first promise to the tiny life inside. It's just us now, but we're going to survive this. Somehow. The Cascade Motor Lodge squatted beside Highway 167 like a tired animal that had given up on finding better shelter. Paint peeled from its mint green siding, and the neon vacancy sign flickered between life and death. Perfect for someone like me, caught in the same uncertain space. My room smelled like cigarette smoke and industrial disinfectant. The bedspread, a horrific pattern of orange and brown flowers, looked like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. I sat on its edge and tried Logan's credit card at an ATM next door. Transaction declined. He'd been thorough. The next morning brought worse news. My architectural firm, where I'd been on sabbatical since the miscarriage, had received a call about concerns regarding my mental stability. My boss, Jeremy, sounded genuinely sorry when he called. "I have to think about the firm's reputation, Evelyn. Maybe it's best if we make the leave permanent." Within 48 hours, I'd gone from architect to nobody. My LinkedIn disappeared. My professional website went dark. Even my Instagram, 5 years of carefully curated life, vanished like it had never existed. Logan's PR team had been busy. 3 nights, I told the motel clerk, counting out cash from my wallet. "That's all I can afford?" She looked at me over her reading glasses, the bleeding hand I'd bandaged with toilet paper, the designer suitcase that didn't match my circumstances, the way I kept touching my stomach like I was checking if something was still there. "Running from something or someone?" Her voice carried the rasp of 40 years of Marlboros. "Both. Neither. I don't know anymore." She slid a business card across the counter. "My sister runs a boarding house about 10 minutes north. Cheaper than here, and she don't ask questions. Tell her Barb sent you." That's how I found Mrs. Danvers and the Victorian house that would save my life. The boarding house sat on a dead-end street in Old Tacoma. 3 stories of fading grandeur surrounded by overgrown rhododendrons. Paint curled from its wooden siding like skin peeling after a burn. But the windows were clean, and smoke rose from the chimney. signs of life among the decay. Mrs. Danvers answered on the third knock. 70-something, built like a steel beam, with silver hair pulled back in a bun tight enough to give me a headache. She wore coveralls and held a wrench like some people hold teacups. Barb's sister? She looked me up and down. You're pregnant. It wasn't a question. How did you? The way you're standing, protecting your middle. Also, you look like you're about to puke, and it's past morning sickness hours. She stepped aside. Room's $400 a month, utilities included. No drugs, no overnight guests, no loud music after 9. Bathrooms shared. Can you handle that? I don't know if I'll have the money. My husband, ex-husband, he's frozen everything. Can you work? I'm an architect. Was. I don't know what I am now. She studied me with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. I asked if you can work, not what degrees you have. Can you paint? Fix things? Clean? Yes. Then we'll figure something out. Room's on the 3rd floor. Hope you don't mind stairs. The room was small but clean, with a single bed, a dresser missing one drawer pull, and a window overlooking the Tacoma port. I could see container ships in the distance, massive and patient, waiting for their turn to unload. I knew the feeling. That first week, I threw up every morning at 6:47 precisely. The bathroom was down the hall, and I'd stumble there in the dark, trying not to wake the other boarders, a collection of people who, like me, had ended up here because somewhere else had spit them out. Days blurred together. I'd walk to the library to use their computers, searching for work, only to find my applications mysteriously rejected within hours. Logan's reach was long. At night, I'd lie in the narrow bed, hand on my growing belly, and talk to the only one who couldn't leave me. Your dad's an asshole, I'd whisper, but you're going to be different. You're going to be kind. Mrs. Danvers found me crying in the kitchen one afternoon, staring at a can of soup I couldn't afford to replace if I ate it. Stop that, she said, matter of fact as always. Crying don't fill stomachs. I don't know what else to do. She pulled a notebook from her coverall pocket, pages stained with machine oil and filled with sketches. I've been wanting to convert the basement into a workshop, draw me up some plans, make it efficient. I'll knock $200 off next month's rent. You don't even know if I'm any good. Girl, I spent 30 years at Boeing before my hands gave out. I can spot an engineer's brain from across a runway. You see things different. How they fit together, how they could work better. Am I wrong? I took the notebook, ran my fingers over her rough sketches. Already I could see it. The flow of space, where to put a workbench to maximize natural light, how to route ventilation for whatever projects she had in mind. No, I said quietly. You're not wrong. That night, she left a plate of food outside my door. No note, no acknowledgement. Just sustenance appearing when I needed it most. Over the next weeks, it became a pattern. Groceries would materialize in the communal kitchen with my name on them. Accidentally ordered too much, she'd grunt when I tried to thank her. Or use it before it spoils. I started helping around the house, fixing a leaky faucet here, patching drywall there. My architectural eye couldn't help but see potential in the old bones of the place. The other boarders began nodding to me in the halls. Marcus, a veteran with hands that shook except when he was working on motorcycles. Lily, barely 20, kicked out for loving the wrong person. Chen, whose English was limited but whose smile needed no translation. We were all broken in our own ways, all refugees from lives that had expelled us. But there was something honest about that brokenness. No one here pretended to be whole. One night, feeling the baby move for the first time, a flutter like butterfly wings, I finally understood. Logan had tried to erase me, make me invisible. But you can't disappear when someone's growing inside you. Every kick was a reminder. I exist. We exist. And that was enough to keep going. You're going to be my anchor, I told my belly. And I'm going to be yours. We don't need anyone else. But even as I said it, listening to Mrs. Danvers fix something in the room below. I knew it wasn't entirely true. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Like a boarding house in Tacoma run by a woman who'd learned that the best way to fix broken things was to give them something useful to do. March arrived like a drunken soldier, stumbling between false spring and winter's last gasps. I was 6 months along, belly round and hard beneath the secondhand maternity clothes from Goodwill. The baby, I'd started calling him Bean, had transformed from flutter to footballer, kicking me awake at all hours. I'd finally found work, if you could call it that. 10 hours a week drafting renovation plans for a local nonprofit that retrofitted houses for disabled veterans. The pay was nothing, but it kept my skills sharp and my mind off the fact that Logan's lawyers had sent 3 more packets of papers I couldn't afford to respond to. Then came the headache. It started behind my eyes on a Tuesday morning, sharp and insistent. By afternoon, my vision had gone fuzzy around the edges. When Mrs. Danvers found me gripping the kitchen counter, face gray with pain, she didn't hesitate. "Hospital, now. I can't afford. Shut up and get in the truck." The emergency room lights felt like knives in my skull. A blood pressure reading made the nurse's face go carefully blank. Then words I'd only read about in my pregnancy books. Preeclampsia. Severe. Immediate admission. Magnesium drip. Bed rest. Fetal monitoring. "Your blood pressure could cause a stroke," the doctor explained, her voice gentle but firm. "Or placental abruption. We need to keep you here, possibly until delivery." Delivery? But I'm only 28 weeks. Which is why we're going to do everything possible to keep your baby inside. Every day counts now. The next weeks dissolved into a medical haze. IV poles became my walking companions. The steady beep of monitors provided my soundtrack. I memorized ceiling tiles and watched other mothers come and go with healthy babies while mine fought to stay put. Logan surfaced once, like a shark sensing blood. He sent his lawyer, not even coming himself, with papers requiring a paternity test and attempting to sign away parental rights to a child who wasn't even born yet. I signed with hands swollen like inflated gloves, too tired to fight, too focused on keeping my blood pressure from spiking and killing us both. Mrs. Danvers visited daily, bringing crossword puzzles and complaints about the other boarders that made me smile despite everything. "That boy Marcus fixed your kitchen faucet wrong. Had to redo the whole thing. Some people got no sense of proper thread tape usage." But I could see the worry in her eyes, the way she'd study the monitors like she was reading Boeing technical manuals again. On a rain-soaked Thursday at 31 weeks, Bean decided he'd had enough. The pain started low and spread like wildfire. Contractions, too strong and too fast. The medical team descended like a practiced army. Words flew over my head. Fetal distress. Emergency cesarean. An ICU team standing by. In the operating room, behind the blue drape that separated me from my lower body, I heard the doctor say, "Extensive bleeding. Clamp there. No, there." Then a sound that changed everything. A cry so thin and small it barely qualified as human. But it was his, my son, alive. 3 pounds, 2 ounces, someone announced. Apgar 6. They whisked him away before I could see more than a flash of red skin and impossibly tiny limbs. The anesthesiologist, a kind woman with graying temples, must have seen my panic. "He's a fighter," she said. "Came out screaming. That's good." They rolled me to recovery while my son went to a plastic box in the NICU, machines breathing for lungs not quite ready for air. When I finally saw him hours later, through medication haze and exhaustion, he looked like a baby bird fallen too soon from the nest. Translucent skin showed every vein. Wires and tubes sprouted from his tiny body. A knit cap covered his head, donated by some grandmother who knitted for babies she'd never meet. "Milo," I whispered, the name coming from nowhere and feeling absolutely right. "Your name is Milo." For 2 weeks, I lived between two worlds, the recovery ward and the NICU. Every 3 hours, I'd pump milk he couldn't yet drink, storing it in tiny bottles labeled with his name and patient number. I learned a new vocabulary: bradycardia episodes, feeding tubes, bilirubin levels. The NICU nurses taught me to change diapers no bigger than cocktail napkins, to read the monitors that tracked his every breath. They never mentioned that I was alone, that no father came to stare through the isolette at this impossible child. But I wasn't alone. Mrs. Danvers appeared with Marcus and Lily, who'd somehow scraped together gas money. Chen brought dumplings his mother made, leaving them at the nurse's station with a shy smile. Even Barb from the motel sent a card. "Heard you had the baby. Kids are tough. He'll make it." One night, when Milo's oxygen levels kept dropping and the doctor spoke in hushed tones about brain bleeds and developmental delays, I finally broke. Sobbed until my chest hurt, milk leaking through my hospital gown, everything a mess. The NICU nurse, Patricia, who'd worked there 20 years, pulled up a chair. "You want to know a secret? The babies who surprise us most are the ones like yours, born into chaos. No fancy nursery waiting. Parents who've been through hell. Those babies, they come out fighting because they already know life's hard. And the fighters? They're the ones who change the world." As if to prove her point, Milo's oxygen levels climbed. Slowly, stubbornly, he improved. Gained weight in precious ounces. Learned to breathe, to eat, to grab my finger with a grip that belied his size. The day before discharge, genetics came with unexpected news. Routine screening had flagged something unusual. Not a defect, they hurried to explain, but a variation. Markers associated with exceptional pattern recognition and spatial reasoning. "Rare," the counselor said. "We usually only see this configuration in, well, it's quite remarkable." I thought of Logan, his uncanny ability to see market patterns others missed. His gift, twisted by greed, passed to a son he'd never want to know. The irony tasted bitter and sweet at once. Finally, after 33 days, we went home. Not to the mansion in Bellevue or even the promised downtown condo, but to a boarding house in Tacoma where a tough old woman had made space for us. Where broken people understood that sometimes the best families are the ones you build from scraps. Milo weighed 4 pounds, 15 ounces, still smaller than most newborns, but breathing on his own. Eating, growing, fighting. That first night back, I sat in the creaky rocking chair Mrs. Danvers had mysteriously procured, holding my impossible son. Outside, Tacoma sprawled in all its industrial glory. Inside, surrounded by walls that had seen better days and people who'd known worse ones, we were home. "We did it, Bean," I whispered. "We survived." He opened eyes still learning to focus, and seemed to look right through me, as if seeing some future I couldn't imagine. In that moment, I understood that survival was just the beginning. The real story, ours, was only starting. Sleep became a foreign concept. Milo needed feeding every 2 hours, his premature stomach too small to hold more than a few ounces. I'd stumble down the hall to the communal kitchen at 3 a.m., warming bottles while he wailed with surprising strength for someone who weighed less than a bag of flour. "Kid's got lungs," Marcus observed one night, shuffling past in his bathrobe. "Reminds me of Reveille. You need anything?" This became our new normal, a boarding house of insomniacs bound by thin walls and thinner resources. Lily started taking the 5 a.m. feeding so I could sleep 2 straight hours. Chen's mother appeared with herbal teas that supposedly helped milk production. Even Mrs. Danvers, who claimed babies were just small, inefficient humans, would hold Milo while I showered, her weathered hands surprisingly gentle. By day, I worked. The nonprofit had increased my hours to 20 a week, barely enough to cover formula when my milk dried up from stress. But it was something. I'd spread blueprints on my bed while Milo napped in a secondhand bouncer, designing dignity into spaces for people who'd lost theirs. One project changed everything. A request to design transitional housing for homeless veterans. Tiny homes, they wanted. Cheap, fast to build, but somehow still feeling like home. The budget was laughable. The timeline, impossible. I said yes immediately. "You're inane," Mrs. Danvers said, reviewing my initial sketches. "Can't build proper homes that small." "Define proper." I showed her my concept. 160 square feet, every inch purposeful. Fold-down desk becomes dining table, bench storage, composting toilet, solar panel compatible. Total cost under $15,000. She studied the plans with her engineer's eye, absently adjusting Milo's bottle angle as he ate. "Modular? Has to be. Ship flat, assemble on site, like IKEA, but for entire homes." She traced the joint specifications. "This connection here's weak. Let me show you something." That night, she took me to her basement workshop, the one I'd designed payment for rent. She'd built it exactly to spec, then filled it with tools I couldn't name and projects in various stages. On one workbench sat what looked like a dollhouse, but built with an engineer's precision. "Been playing with quick assembly structures," she said gruffly. "Hobby of mine. Your plans are good, but the connectors need work. See here?" We spent hours refining, her practical knowledge merging with my design aesthetic. Milo slept in his carrier between us, occasionally contributing squeaks and sighs to our discussion. By dawn, we'd revolutionized the joint system, cutting assembly time in half. The nonprofit loved it. So did the veterans who'd be living in them. Word spread, carefully, quietly, the way good news travels among people used to bad. A reporter from the Tacoma News Tribune wanted to do a story. I declined, still wary of Logan's reach, but agreed to let them feature the design without my name. That's when Dr. Nate Kingston called. "I saw your transitional housing design," he said without preamble. "I'm working on something similar at MIT, disaster relief housing using recycled materials and AI optimization. Nobody wants to fund it, says there's no profit in helping refugees. But I think you understand that profit isn't always monetary." We met at a coffee shop downtown, me with Milo strapped to my chest, him with 3 laptops and the energy of someone who'd forgotten to sleep for several days. Vietnamese American, early 30s, with ink-stained fingers and glasses held together with electrical tape. "The problem with current relief housing," he explained, sketching on napkins faster than I could follow, "is it's designed by people who've never been displaced. They focus on survival, not dignity. But look at your veteran houses. You get it. The psychological need for beauty, even in crisis." He showed me his work, AI algorithms that could customize home designs based on climate, local materials, cultural preferences, houses that learned from their inhabitants, adjusting ventilation and light for optimal mental health. It was brilliant. It was impossible. It was exactly what the world needed. "I want to hire you," I said, surprising myself. "I can't pay you. I can barely feed my son. But I'm starting something, and I need a CTO who thinks like you do." He laughed. "You're starting a company while living in a boarding house with a premature infant?" "I'm starting a company because I'm living in a boarding house with a premature infant." I adjusted Milo's hat as he began to fuss. "Rock bottom's just another foundation to build on." That night, I registered the LLC using the boarding house as the business address. Milo Labs, named for the tiny warrior sleeping in a dresser drawer padded with blankets because I couldn't afford a crib. Mrs. Danvers found me crying over the paperwork. Happy tears this time. "Stop that," she said, but gentler than before. "We got work to do. That workshop's going to need expansion if you're serious about prototypes." "We? You think I spent 30 years at Boeing to retire and watch TV?" She pulled out her own notebook, filled with modifications to our joint system. "I've got engineer friends going stir-crazy in retirement. They'd love a project with meaning. Besides, someone needs to make sure you don't screw up the load calculations." And that's how it started. Not in a gleaming startup incubator, but in a basement in Tacoma. Nate worked remotely from MIT, sending code at all hours. Mrs. Danvers recruited her Boeing network, retirees with decades of experience and a hunger to build something that mattered. I designed between feedings, sketching with one hand while burping Milo with the other. The first prototype went up in the backyard. 200 square feet of dignity, assembled in 4 hours by volunteers who'd never built anything before. Marcus wept when we showed him the veterans unit with grab bars he'd suggested. Lily painted a mural on one wall, birds breaking free from cages, flying toward an unseen horizon. Local news picked it up despite my anonymity attempts. Tacoma boarding house becomes unlikely innovation hub. They photographed the prototype, but not me, though Milo's tiny hand made it into one shot, reaching toward the camera like he was grasping for the future itself. Logan must have seen it. His lawyer sent another letter, this time claiming any innovations developed during our marriage belonged jointly to him. I fed it to Mrs. Danvers' workshop stove, watching our past become ash while our future took shape in salvaged wood and recycled steel. "You know he'll come for you eventually," Mrs. Danvers warned. "Let him come." I looked at Milo, who'd discovered his own hands, and stared at them like they held the secrets of the universe. By then, we'll be too strong to break. But strength, I was learning, wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about breaking and rebuilding, over and over, each time creating something more resilient than before, like the houses we designed, like the company growing from nothing, like the boy who'd entered the world too soon but refused to leave it. That spring, as cherry blossoms bloomed incongruously around our industrial neighborhood, I stood in the workshop teaching Lily and Chen basic CAD skills, while Milo watched from his bouncer, eyes tracking everything with unusual focus for a baby. Mrs. Danvers and Nate argued happily over stress calculations in the corner. Marcus tested assembly instructions, suggesting improvements with hands that no longer shook. This was my new architecture. Not just buildings, but communities. Not just shelter, but home. And at the center of it all, a tiny boy whose existence had cost me everything and given me something I never knew I needed: the courage to build from ashes. Milo's first birthday arrived with little fanfare and enormous significance. He'd beaten every dire prediction, though he remained small for his age. More remarkably, he'd started recognizing patterns in ways that made even Nate pause. Block towers weren't random. They followed mathematical sequences. He'd sort toys by increasingly complex categories, creating order from chaos with chubby, determined hands. "Your kid's scary smart," Nate observed, watching Milo arrange shapes into a perfect Fibonacci spiral. "Like, possibly change the world smart." "He doesn't talk yet," I worried aloud. The pediatrician said some premature babies developed language slowly, but the silence unnerved me. Einstein didn't talk until he was 4. Mrs. Danvers lifted Milo onto her hip with practiced ease. Some brains are too busy thinking to bother with chit-chat. That same week, everything accelerated. The California wildfire season had been devastating. Entire towns reduced to ash. FEMA called, desperate. They'd seen our prototypes, heard about houses that could be assembled in hours instead of months. Could we scale up? "We'd need massive funding," Nate calculated. "Materials, transportation, assembly teams." "How much?" I asked. $2 million minimum, and that's cutting every corner." I looked around our makeshift headquarters, Mrs. Danvers' basement workshop, now expanded into 3 rooms. Our staff of retirees and boarding house residents. My son playing with prototypes like toys. It was impossible. "Write the proposal," I said. "We'll figure out the money." The next 72 hours blurred together. Nate coded optimization algorithms while I refined designs for California's specific needs. Fire resistance, earthquake stability, psychological comfort for the traumatized. Mrs. Danvers called in every favor from her Boeing days, sourcing materials at cost. But money remained the wall we couldn't climb. Traditional investors laughed. a boarding house startup run by a single mother and retired engineers. Banks wouldn't even return our calls. Logan had poisoned those wells thoroughly. Then Chen's nephew, a kid who'd made millions in crypto and felt guilty about it, saw our work. "This is real," he said simply. "Not disrupting laundry delivery or whatever, actually helping people. I'm in for $500K. His investment triggered others. A Boeing executive who'd worked with Mrs. Danvers. A veteran who'd lived in one of our prototype homes. Small amounts that added up to just enough. Not the $2 million we needed, but enough to try. We incorporated officially that autumn in a ceremony held in the boarding house kitchen. Milo Labs, with Mrs. Danvers as COO, Nate as CTO via remote connection, and me as CEO, a title that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. "You sure about the name?" Mrs. Danvers asked, watching Milo stack cups with architectural precision. "He's why we exist." I signed the papers with my son on my lap, his small hand grabbing at the pen. Every house we build carries his story, that even the smallest, most vulnerable beginnings can shelter others. Our first California deployment launched in November. 25 houses, flat-packed on trucks, heading to Paradise, a town whose name now tasted of ash and irony. I wanted to go, to see our work help real people. But Milo had caught RSV from another child at the library. We watched the deployment via Nate's live stream, my son wheezing in my arms while our dreams took shape 3 states away. The houses went up like flowers blooming and fast forward, 6 hours from truck to home. Families who'd been living in tents for months walked into spaces designed for dignity. Small but complete, with windows positioned to frame hope instead of destruction. "We did it," Nate said over video, grinning as children ran through their new neighborhood. "Holy shit, Evelyn, we actually did it." Orders flooded in. Oregon needed houses for evacuees. Washington wanted them for homeless encampments. The UN inquired about international deployment. Suddenly, our impossible idea had become inevitably necessary. But growth meant exposure. A Forbes article titled, "From Ashes to Innovation, the Startup Rebuilding America," featured our story. They'd promised anonymity, but details leaked through. A boarding house in Tacoma, a single mother, a company named after her son. Logan's email arrived 2 days later. "Interesting what you've built with my money. We should talk." I deleted it without responding, but my hands shook. He'd found us. The protection of obscurity was gone. "You can't run forever," Mrs. Danvers said that night. We sat in her workshop, now too small for our growing operation. "Man like that, he'll want his piece. There's nothing to take. Every dollar goes back into building houses." "You think that matters to him?" She gestured at Milo, who was teaching himself to walk by pushing a prototype house frame. "It's not about money, it's about control. And that boy represents something he can't control. Consequences." She was right. Logan had always needed to win, to own, to dominate. Milo's existence challenged his narrative of being the wronged party. Our success, built on the ruins of what he'd destroyed, must gnaw at him. But I had weapons now he didn't expect. A company with a mission. A team who'd chosen family over blood. And a son who, though wordless, communicated in languages Logan would never understand. The architecture of compassion. The mathematics of resilience. That winter, as Milo took his first independent steps between prototype houses, I made a decision. We wouldn't hide anymore. Milo Labs would grow in the light, transparent about our origins and intentions. Let Logan come. Let him see what grew from the ashes he'd created. "Mama," Milo said suddenly, his first word at 18 months. Not randomly, but while pointing at a house design, then at me, connecting creator to creation with tiny fingers and enormous understanding. "Yes, baby," I whispered, pulling him close. "Mama builds houses." He patted my face with sticky hands, then pointed at himself with the confidence of someone who'd already figured out his place in the equation. Milo, help, two words that contained our entire future. In the background, Mrs. Danvers wiped her eyes and blamed sawdust. Nate whooped over video call. And somewhere in Seattle, a man who'd thrown us away was about to learn that some things, once discarded, transform into something far more powerful than what they'd been before. The Forbes photographer arrived the next week. This time, I didn't hide. I stood in our workshop surrounded by house frames and hope, holding my son who'd inherited his father's mind but not his heart. Let the world see us. Let them know that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building something beautiful from the pieces someone else left behind. 3 years passed in a blur of small victories and smaller sleep. Milo Labs grew from basement startup to a recognized force in humanitarian architecture. Our houses sheltered wildfire survivors in California, hurricane victims in Louisiana, and homeless veterans across the Pacific Northwest. Each deployment carried stories: families reunited, dignity restored, hope rebuilt from prefabricated panels and revolutionary joints. Milo grew too, still small but fierce, like a compact generator of impossible energy. At 4, he could calculate load-bearing requirements faster than our junior engineers. He still spoke sparingly, preferring to communicate through models and drawings, his spatial intelligence off every chart. The autism diagnosis hadn't surprised me, just given a name to his beautiful, different mind. "Mama, broken," he said one morning, pointing at a structural flaw in a prototype that 3 engineers had missed. His vocabulary remained limited, but his understanding was limitless. The boarding house had transformed too. We'd bought the building, Mrs. Danvers insisted on being a co-owner, and converted it into transitional housing for our assembly teams. Former refugees learning construction skills, veterans finding purpose, young people aging out of foster care discovering they could build homes for others who'd lost theirs. The old Victorian wore its renovation proudly, no longer fading but glowing with purpose. Then came the invitation that changed everything. Forbes 30 Under 30. Summit, featuring me as a keynote speaker. Innovative leaders reshaping America. My first instinct was to decline. Public speaking terrified me more than homelessness had. "You're going," Mrs. Danvers declared, "and you're taking the boy. Let them see where innovation really comes from." The San Francisco venue gleamed with the kind of aggressive modernity I'd once admired. Tech bros in $400 sneakers pitched apps for problems that didn't exist while actual crises went unsolved. I felt out of place in my Target blazer, Milo clinging to my hand in his noise-canceling headphones. My talk was scheduled between a cryptocurrency wonder kid and a woman who'd revolutionized food delivery. I walked on stage carrying Milo. He refused to separate in the overwhelming environment, and faced an audience of people who'd never wondered where they'd sleep tonight. 4 years ago, I began, voice shaking. I was 8 weeks pregnant, bleeding from a hand sliced by my own wedding glass, checking into a motel that rented by the hour. My ex-husband had given me 60 minutes to leave the home I'd designed. I want to tell you about failure, not the kind you pivot from, but the kind that leaves you with nothing but a suitcase and an impossible pregnancy. Silence. Even the phone scrolling stopped. I told them everything. The boarding house, Mrs. Danvers, Milo's traumatic birth, building dignity from scraps, how innovation born from desperation differs from innovation born from privilege. Milo sat on my hip, occasionally humming, his presence more powerful than any PowerPoint. "We don't disrupt industries," I concluded. "We rebuild lives. One room, one family, one impossible recovery at a time. Because innovation without compassion is just elaborate cruelty." The applause started slowly, then thundered. But I wasn't looking at the audience. I was watching the side door, where a familiar figure stood in shadows. Tall, controlled, wearing a suit that cost more than our monthly materials budget. Logan. He looked older, though handsomely so. The environmental prophet persona had evolved. Now he promoted sustainable luxury, green technology for the wealthy. His latest wife, the activist Melissa, glowed beside him in ethically sourced diamonds. I finished my talk, answered questions, smiled for photos. But I knew he was waiting. The confrontation I'd dreaded and prepared for was finally here. He cornered me during the cocktail reception, while Milo built impossible structures from appetizer picks at our table. Evelyn, still saying my name like he owned it. You've done interesting work. We've helped house 8,000 people, I replied evenly. Is that interesting enough? His jaw tightened. He hated when I didn't play my assigned role. The boy, he's mine. Biologically? Yes. In any way that matters? No. I want a paternity test. Custody arrangements. He's clearly gifted. Those genetic markers you mentioned in Forbes? I know they came from my family. The same genetics you wanted me to abort? I kept my voice low, aware of phones recording everywhere. The child you said I'd probably lose anyway? Melissa touched his arm. A warning or restraint? She looked uncomfortable, probably hearing this version for the first time. I've made mistakes, Logan said, the closest he'd ever come to apology. But a boy needs his father, especially one with his potential. I can provide opportunities you can't. Like what? Teaching him to discard people when they're inconvenient? Milo chose that moment to appear at my side, tugging my jacket. He studied Logan with those enormous eyes that missed nothing, then made his judgment in the most devastating way possible, complete disinterest. He turned back to me, holding up his structure. Mama, fixed it. Better now? 4 words that said everything. We fixed things. We made them better. That's what we did, who we were. I'll see you in court, Logan said quietly. Yes, I agreed. You will. He left with Melissa, who kept glancing back like she was recalculating her choices. I sat with Milo, my brilliant, strange, perfect son, and felt the storm approaching. But storms didn't scare me anymore. I'd weathered worse with less. Now I had lawyers who believed in our mission, a company that generated goodwill along with revenue, and a story that resonated with anyone who'd ever been discarded. Most importantly, I had Milo, my anchor, my reason. Scared? He asked, patting my cheek with sticky fingers. No, baby, not anymore. That night, back in our Tacoma headquarters, Mrs. Danvers cracked open a beer and raised it in mock salute. To battles we didn't choose, but we'll win anyway. The boarding house family gathered, former residents who'd become employees, engineers who'd become family. We'd built something Logan could never understand. A company with a soul, a family without blood, a future from forgotten pieces. Outside, rain fell on Seattle and Tacoma alike, but we'd learned to build shelters that could withstand any storm. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by a courier who looked apologetic. 300 pages of legal warfare. Logan Price versus Evelyn Hart, regarding parental rights, custody arrangements, and fiduciary interests in minor child Milo Hart. Fiduciary interests, I read aloud to Mrs. Danvers. He's claiming financial interest in his own son. Man's consistent, she grunted, scanning the documents with engineer's eyes. Sees everything as an asset, even children. Logan hadn't just hired lawyers. He'd hired an army. The filing painted me as unstable, opportunistic, someone who'd hidden a child from his loving father. It conveniently omitted the abortion demand, the midnight eviction, the systematic destruction of my career. But the worst part was the custody request. Primary physical custody with supervised visitation for me. He wanted to take Milo. Over my dead body, Mrs. Danvers said flatly. The legal team I'd assembled for Milo Labs, young lawyers who believed in our mission, worked pro bono to respond. But Logan had infinite resources and patience. He could bleed us slowly, death by 1,000 legal cuts. Then the media exploded. Tech titan fights for son he never knew. TechCrunch. Green CEO discovers secret child with genius IQ. Business Insider. Custody battle of the century. Environment leader versus housing revolutionary. Forbes. The narrative split predictably. Logan's PR team pushed the devoted father denied his rights angle. But the internet has a long memory. Screenshots surfaced of my disappeared social media, the sudden job loss, the isolation. Former EcoCore employees began speaking anonymously about the company's toxic culture. Sarah Chen, a former marketing director, broke her NDA publicly. I watched Logan Price destroy 3 female executives who threatened him. Evelyn Hart was just the only one pregnant when he did it. The testimony was damning. More women came forward. Melissa, his current wife, filed for separation within a week, but Logan doubled down, arriving at the first custody hearing in calculated perfection. Humble suit, concerned expression, legal team filling 2 rows. I sat with my single lawyer, Milo, between us building patterns with courtroom pencils. Your Honor, Logan's lead attorney began, my client simply wants to know his son, to provide opportunities commensurate with the child's extraordinary gifts. Ms. Hart has deliberately prevented this relationship. Our response was simpler. We filed the text messages from the night he'd thrown us out, the divorce papers he'd pre-prepared, the medical records showing he'd been notified of every milestone while choosing silence. But the judge, an older man who probably saw a successful businessman versus a single mother, seemed sympathetic to Logan's transformation narrative. People change, he noted. Fathers deserve chances. Then we played our ace. We'd like to call Dr. Patricia Winters, my lawyer announced. The NICU nurse who'd saved Milo's life walked in like an avenging angel in scrubs. She'd kept meticulous notes, as good nurses do. She read them aloud. Every visit I'd made, every night I'd slept on waiting room chairs, every breakdown in the family bathroom. And the visitor logs showing Logan's complete absence despite being notified of his son's critical condition. 33 days, she said, looking directly at Logan. That baby fought for life for 33 days. His mother never left. His father never came. The courtroom shifted. Logan's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. But the killing blow came from Milo himself. We need to determine the child's preferences, the judge decided. Given his communication differences, we'll use a child psychologist specializing in autism spectrum disorders. Dr. Marina Reyes spent 3 hours with Milo while we waited in agony. She emerged with careful notes and a revelation that shouldn't have surprised me. Milo communicated quite clearly, she reported. He drew his family, extensive and detailed. Ms. Hart is central. Mrs. Danvers, Mr. Marcus, Ms. Lilly, and others from their community feature prominently. When asked about his father, he drew a blank square and said, "Empty room, no build there." She continued, "In my professional opinion, Milo has formed secure attachments within his current environment. He shows no recognition of Mr. Price as a parental figure. Forced integration could be significantly traumatic." Logan's team scrambled. They demanded paternity tests. We agreed immediately. They questioned my mental health. We provided therapy records showing post-traumatic growth. They attacked my financial status. We showed Milo Labs' success and stability. Then, in a move that reeked of desperation, they petitioned for immediate temporary custody, claiming my boarding house environment was unsuitable for a gifted child. That triggered something unexpected, our community's rage. The boarding house residents, past and present, organized. Marcus, his veteran network. Lily, with her artist collective. Chen's extended family. The Boeing retirees. The families living in our houses across 3 states. They flooded the court with letters, showed up at hearings, created a social media campaign that went viral. Milo Knows Home. A video of Milo explaining our building process. Brilliant, happy, secure. Got 12 million views. Comments poured in from parents of special needs children, from abuse survivors, from anyone who understood that family isn't about blood or money, but about who shows up. The final hearing arrived in December, Seattle gray and drizzling. Logan sat rigid, his empire crumbling. Melissa had filed her own exposé. EcoCore's board was in revolt, his green profit image tarnished beyond repair. He'd lost everything trying to claim the one thing he'd thrown away. Judge Williams, a different judge, a woman who'd actually read every document, spoke carefully. "Mr. Price, you made a choice 4 years ago. You decided this child should not exist. When he persisted in existing, you chose absence. Ms. Hart made different choices. She chose difficulty, poverty, uncertainty, but also presence, community, and love. The law recognizes biology, but it also recognizes reality. Milo Hart knows who his family is. Full custody to me. Supervised visitation for Logan if Milo ever chose it. Child support set at a percentage of his income. Money that would go directly into trust for Milo's education." Logan stood to leave, pausing at our table. For a moment, the mask slipped. I saw something raw. Regret? Loss? Or just anger at losing control? "I would have come around," he said quietly. "Eventually." "Eventually isn't parenting," I replied. "It's just regret with a future tense." He left alone, expensive shoes echoing on courthouse marble. Milo looked up from his building. He'd constructed a perfect model of our first disaster house during the entire proceeding. "Done now?" he asked. "Yes, baby, all done." "Good. Build more houses now." And that's what we did. The settlement money went into a foundation for housing kids aging out of foster care. Logan's monthly payments funded scholarships for construction training. We turned his money into shelter for the abandoned, poetic justice in prefabricated form. The media painted it as David versus Goliath, but they missed the real story. It wasn't about winning. It was about protecting what we'd built from someone who only knew how to tear down. It was about choosing the family that chose you back. That night, in our boarding house kitchen, surrounded by chosen family and legal victory, I watched Milo show Marcus a new joint design. 4 years old and already improving on my work. His father's brilliance, maybe, but channeled through a heart that learned love from a village of broken people who'd figured out how to build. "No more lawyers?" Mrs. Danvers asked, popping champagne. "No more lawyers," I confirmed. "Good. We have houses to build." And we did. So many houses, so many homes, so many futures for people who'd been told they didn't deserve them. All because a boy named Milo had taught us that even empty rooms could be filled with something worth saving. 5 years later, I stood in the Arizona desert watching the sun rise over a small city that hadn't existed 6 months ago. 400 Milo Labs homes arranged in careful clusters, each positioned to maximize shade and community. Solar panels glinted like scales on a massive, benevolent dragon. Gardens sprouted between units. Residents had started planting within days of arrival, creating life in spaces that had known only sand. This was our flagship project, housing climate refugees from the latest California megafire. But it was more than shelter. It was proof that disaster could birth beauty, that displacement could lead to belonging. "Mama, the angle's wrong." Milo, now 9, pointed at a solar array with the authority of someone who'd been calculating sun position since he could walk. Still small for his age, still sparse with words, but his mind blazed like the desert sun itself. "Show me," I said, handing him the tablet. He drew corrections with quick, precise strokes. His modifications would increase efficiency by 8%, enough to power the community center we hadn't budgeted for but the residents had requested. In Milo's world, community spaces weren't luxuries but load-bearing walls for the human spirit. "Better," he pronounced, then wandered off to examine an interesting shadow pattern. Mrs. Danvers approached, now 75, but moving like someone who'd found her second wind. "News crew's here. They want to film you with the residents." "Let them film the residents," Their stories matter more. Your story started this. No, I corrected. Logan's cruelty started this. We just refused to let it end us. She snorted, her version of agreement, and went to wrangle the media. I watched Milo interact with a group of kids who'd lost their homes 3 months ago. He didn't speak much, but he listened with his whole body, then started building with them. Within minutes, they were constructing impossible towers, laughing at gravity. My phone buzzed. Nate, now running our R&D division from a proper lab, not MIT's basement. UN contract approved, 50,000 units, 5 countries. You did it, Ev. I hadn't done it. We had. The boarding house collective that had become a movement, the forgotten people who'd refused to disappear. The boy who'd taught us that different minds could see better solutions. Ms. Hart? I turned to find a young woman, maybe 22, clutching a portfolio. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm Sienna Walsh. I heard you speak at Stanford last year about building from brokenness. I remember. You asked about sustainable trauma. Her eyes widened. You remember one question from hundreds? It was a good question. How emotional damage becomes structural damage in communities. You understood something most architects miss. She hesitated, then rushed forward. I aged out of foster care, living in my car. But I have ideas. Shelters that adapt to trauma responses. Spaces that heal instead of just contain. Everyone says I'm too young, too damaged, too... When can you start? What? We need a trauma-informed design specialist. The job comes with housing. We converted the old boarding house's second floor into studio apartments for emerging builders. Mrs. Danvers will pretend to be tough, but she'll mother you within a week. Can you handle that? Tears ran down her face. Yes. Good. Report Monday. Bring your impossible ideas. We specialize in those. She left clutching hope like a life vest. Another builder born from breaking. Another future pulled from wreckage. The sun climbed higher, desert heat beginning its daily assault. But our houses stayed cool. Milo's ventilation innovations creating microclimates of survival. I thought about Logan, last seen in a Business Insider piece about former tech leaders who lost their way. His empire had crumbled, investors fleeing, reputation destroyed by the women who'd finally spoken. He lived alone in a mansion that probably echoed. I didn't feel satisfaction, just sadness for someone who'd had everything and understood nothing. Mama! Milo appeared at my side, holding a small succulent he'd found growing in an impossible place. A crack in pure concrete, life insisting on itself. Like us, he said simply. Yes, baby, exactly like us. A car approached, kicking up dust. I recognized the driver, Patricia Winters, the NICU nurse who'd saved my son. She visited every few months, checking on her miracle baby. But this time, she wasn't alone. A young woman emerged from the passenger side, holding a baby who couldn't have been more than 3 months old. Teen mother, I guessed. Exhausted, scared, running from something or someone. Evelyn, Patricia said simply. This is Maria. She needs what you needed. No other explanation necessary. Maria looked at our houses, at the children playing, at Milo offering her baby his succulent with careful hands. I don't have anything, Maria whispered. He took everything, said I was crazy, that I'd lose the baby like I lost everything else. You have everything, I told her. You got out. You kept your baby. Everything else we build. Mrs. Danvers appeared as if summoned, took one look at the situation, and shifted into crisis mode. Third house on the left is empty. Furnished, stocked. You allergic to anything? Baby formula or breast? Never mind, we'll stock both. As they integrated Maria into our careful ecosystem of care, I stood with Milo in the morning light. Another circle completing. Another woman saved by other women who remembered their own saving. We need more houses, Milo observed. Many more. Yes, think we can do it? He gave me the look reserved for silly questions. We build from ashes. Everything starts as ashes. Truth from a 9-year-old who'd been born from ashes himself. That afternoon, as the news crew filmed residents telling their stories, as Maria fed her baby in a home that was suddenly hers, as Milo taught refugee children the mathematics of hope through building blocks, I felt the weight and wonder of full circle moments. 5 years ago, I'd bled on white carpet, thinking my life was over. Now I stood in a desert we'd made bloom, surrounded by hundreds who'd found home in our impossible dreams. We'd built more than houses. We'd built proof that destruction isn't final, that the discarded can become essential, that love builds better than money ever could. My phone rang. Unknown number, Seattle area code. Evelyn, this is Melissa Price, formerly. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I'm starting a foundation for women leaving abusive relationships. I was wondering, could Milo Labs teach us to build safe houses? Real ones, not just legal concepts? The universe's sense of humor remained intact. Yes, I said, watching Milo explain aerodynamics to his new friends. We can teach anyone to build. That's what we do. Even someone who helped hurt you? Especially then, healing happens in the building. After we hung up, I found Milo sitting with Maria's baby, showing him the desert succulent with infinite patience. My son, who'd entered the world too early and too small, now helping another child who'd arrived in chaos. What are you teaching him? I asked. That small things grow strong in hard places, Milo said. Like us, like Mama, like home. Home. Not a place, but a practice. Not inherited, but built. Not perfect, but possible. Even in the desert. Even from ashes. Even when everyone said it couldn't be done. The sun set over our impossible city, painting the sky in shades of hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new refugees, new buildings to design, and lives to shelter. But tonight, in the cooling desert air, surrounded by the families we'd helped and been helped by, I understood what Milo had always known. From ashes, we rise. From ashes, we build. From ashes, we become the steel that shelters others. And in that becoming, we finally, truly, come home.